It's a social need, because what Shakespeare presents us is a very interesting scenario. We have a Duke of Venice, incapable of doing anything. We have Antonio, this honest merchant who has lived his life honorably, unable to do anything. We have Bassanio telling Shylock that I'm going to give you double, I'm going to give you triple. Please, just forgive. But he does not want to be convinced, and he doesn't want to accept. He just wants his vengeance. That's a man's world. You have given Shylock the power that he has craved for so long. Is he going to let go? Of course not. And so in this gridlock of men struggling, Portia enters like a magical key and opens up the lock. She first confronts Shylock and asks him to be merciful. When Shylock disagrees and says, no, why should I be merciful? And I won't be. And he resists. Then Portia, and this is the climax of the story, asks Shylock that, well, according to your agreement, you deserve to have the pound of flesh. So we're going to go word by word by the agreement, because that's what you want. That's what gives you power. That's what you are trying to seek. Justice, right? Word by word. And when Shylock is about to penetrate the dagger into Antonio's heart, she says, wait a second. There's one more thing. You did not mention in the agreement that there would be a drop of blood. So take your pound of flesh, literally what you wanted, but make sure that if a drop of blood falls on this Christian land, that you have shed the blood of an honest Christian, then hell be destroyed, hell be opened up on you. And so Shylock doesn't know what to do. So he says, you know what? I don't want my justice anymore. And this is the part that is very interesting, because Bassanio agrees and says, okay, you know what? Take the money and you can go now. Everyone think that it's over. But Portia says, wait a minute. We're not done yet. I'm not done yet. This is real power. This is the part that we really feel what it means to be merciful, and how mercy is more powerful than justice. Because if you remember, Portia reminded Shylock that true strength is not in using it. True strength is not when you exercise it, but true strength is in preserving power. The fact that no one dares to attack a lion makes the lion the king of the jungle. Or else the king of the jungle could have been so many other animals. But it's not. There are animals like the elephant, or the hyenas, or the tiger, that can be more fierce, that can be more vicious, that can be more destructive. But the king of the jungle is a term only given to the lion. And the reason is because lion is the only animal that no one dares to attack. And I think this is what Shakespeare wanted to show us with the power of mercy over justice. That real strength is not in, as he puts it in a metaphor when Portia is giving that opening to Shylock. It's not like a scepter that you hold and constantly use, but a scepter that the king holds in his hand, and no one dares to attack the king because they know the consequences. That's real strength. That's real power. And to make the long story short, that is the climax of the story, when everything turns around. Shylock falls on his knees and asks, ironically, for mercy. And it's so ironic that the character that was so that was so much resisting to be merciful, the character that was so persistent in being merciless, when situation changed in a matter of seconds, fell on his knees and asked for the same forgiveness that earlier he was denying it. And I think that's what made the story very powerful. That really Shakespeare illustrated the power of mercy. That although we think people who have mercy are weak, it's exactly the opposite. People who have mercy are very powerful because they haven't exercised their strength yet. They have understood the nature of power, which is in its in preserving, not exercising it. And finally, the story ends when Portia asks Bassanio and Antonio, well, not Portia, but disguised as a lawyer, for the ring. Because they wanted to repay. She says, no, I don't want any money. Since I helped you, that's enough for me. But they say, no, please, we insist, we need to pay you. And says, okay, you know what, since you want to pay me, how about the ring? And at first, they refuse. But then at the end of the day, Bassanio says, you know what, fine, I'll take the ring off. I'll give it to you. And this is very interesting because it shows how in a man's world, promises are so easily broken. We continue to justify our broken promises, but that's exactly the weak nature of a man that Shakespeare is being critical of, I think. Because if you think about it, the Tudor dynasty, from King Henry I to the second to the third, to King Henry V, who famously destroyed the French in the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, all the way to King Henry VIII, who had 6 wives and beheaded 2 of them, they all claim to be powerful men. But at the end of the day, the English culture owes its strength and power to the quill of Shakespeare and to Queen Elizabeth, a woman who spent all her wealth, all her power for the good of this culture, the English culture. Instead of waging wars and fighting family feud, she spent that wealth in the right way. She spent the money in supporting the press, publication of books, plays, performances, and that is what dramatically evolutionized the English culture. From the small island of savage tribes fighting one another endlessly to a dominating power in the world that today, from sunrise in New Zealand to Australia to India to South Africa to Canada, where the sun sets, we all speak English, and we owe it to the literature that Shakespeare left us with. Of course, there were many, many writers after that, but you cannot deny that Shakespeare played a very, very key role in unifying the scripture and the literature of English. And so, in his stories, he constantly reminds us that in our man's world, strength is very much wrongly defined. Strength is seen as the power of the sword, whereas strength is not the power of the sword, but in the preserving of the power of the sword, that it should never be used. It's like military power. Strong countries are those countries that no one dares to attack, not those countries that constantly wage wars, if you think about it. Because when you're constantly waging wars, you're degenerating yourself. You're exhausting yourself, and you are more prone to failure than when you're preserving it. And I think Shakespeare did a fantastic job in Merchant of Venice, especially at the end when Bassanio returns and asks Portia. Portia asks him for the ring, and he says, you know what, I gave the ring away, although I had promised. Classic man's excuse. And so Portia wittingly jokes around with him, fools around with him, and says, you know what? The doctor that you're talking about, the lawyer that you're talking about, came over, and I slept with him to get the ring. And of course, that's not true. But what Portia is trying to do here is to remind Bassanio that if she had done something similar, how awful it would have been in his man's world. And that brings us to the end and the character of Portia. We see a very mixed character. From the very beginning of the story, Shakespeare portrays this character of Portia, of this spoiled princess who doesn't want any of the suitors and is constantly nagging about how her fate is shaped by her father's decision to marry whoever chooses the right casket. However, we begin to gain respect for her as the story develops, especially near the middle when Bassanio enters and asks her for the casket. And she is very interesting. She's in this position. When you see the caskets from the King of Morocco to the Prince of Paris, they all choose the wrong boxes, yet Portia is patient. Her patience begins to show itself. And when Bassanio wants to leave, it is her understanding that we admire, that she allows her husband to go back and get on with his business. And yet, by giving the ring, we see that intriguing, complicating personality of Portia, that a person can be very honest, like Antonio, but at the same time be very smart and clever, like Portia. I think this is what Shakespeare wanted to show us. Because throughout the story, we see constant contradictions in Portia's character, and we think that this makes her a contradicting character, but it does not. Portia's character is one of the most consistent. That's how she's able to win the case against Shylock. Remember that. The fact that she's able to be so patient with Shylock at the beginning and try to convince him in the right way shows her patience and her honesty. But at the same time, when Shylock refuses, she needs to be witty. She needs to be clever in order to win. This is what Antonio lacked. This is what Brutus lacked in his character. And I think this is what Shakespeare wanted to show us. That pure honesty and being an honorable man doesn't get you very far. You're just being too idealistic. I think this is what Shakespeare deliberately is trying to remind us. That you can be constantly idealistic, but that will not be able to get you anywhere. In order to live in this world, we have to be honest, we have to be honorable, but at the same time, we have to be clever. And that is not a contradiction. Portia proved that. You can be smart, you can be witty, you can be humorous, you can be patient, and you can be strong like Portia. She was truly one of the strongest characters that Shakespeare introduced. And for that, I will always enjoy reading the story, and I hope that you enjoyed this review as well. Have yourself a wonderful day. Thank you.